All right, my friends, happy Thursday to you. We have a special live stream here. We teamed up with Trinnov and Audiovice. We have Leon Shaw, the owner and founder of Audiovice, on
Not the owner anymore. I'm retired and sold out.
Oh, okay. Well, the former owner.
Former owner.
I still feel starstruck that you're on our channel right now. Of course, we've got Nick. Nick and I go way back. We've done a lot of live streams here. And we got Jon. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Awesome. So I wanted to talk to you guys about some of the cool features that Trinnov offers. I want to do some, if we could talk about some installs that Audiovice has done. But before we get into that, I just want to give my experience. The first time I actually heard a full Trinnov system, believe it or not, was at the Audiovice Live 2022 show. That was the first show that Audiovice ran. And I just have to give props again. It was one of the best trade show experiences I've ever had. And I've been to all of them. And it was such an awesomely put together show. And the Trinnov room at that show it was the largest room at the place. It had the Trinnov processing, a Sony projector that was so bright that if you stuck your hand in front of the lens, you could have burned the skin off. That was impressive to me right there. And it had a full complement of RBH speakers. And what blew me away about that demo, and I talked to Jon, I talked to you briefly, but I talked to Shane, the owner, the guy that ran the speakers for RBH. He ran I think it was a single point calibration with Trinnov, and the results were astonishing. Like everywhere I sat in that room, the bass was linear, it was even. The panning, the object panning, everything. I think we did the Dune demo. We did some music demos. I was blown away that just a single point measurement room correction did that good of a job. And I think it was not even that long of a process. So Jon, maybe you could give us
that was I think a 9.4.6 system, if I remember right. And there was also a lot of biamping and triamping going on. So it was, in the grand scheme of things, it was a relatively complicated system. But I think, once everything was physically in place, because there were some delays with freight being delivered and so forth. But once everything was physically unpacked and connected, the configuration and that 1 point calibration took a total of about 45 minutes. It just does, it's not that hard. The tools are all right there. And, if you want to do half a dozen or a dozen or however many measurements, you can do that too. But in my mind, the biggest value of doing multiple measurements in different locations around the room is you can kind of look at the results and determine, is this one over here just an oddball measurement? Because Murphy's Law said if you only did a single measurement, it would be like the worst spot in the whole room. And then we're corrected everywhere else. So if you do multiple measurements, you can make sure that what you're doing actually works over the larger area, and that you don't want it to be too idiosyncratic. On the other hand, I always do a quick computation after just one measurement, because you would hate to see it, but you'd be surprised how often there's a blown tweeter in one of the surround speakers or something like that. And there's really not a lot of point in doing more measurements until it gets fixed.
Yeah, true. Well, I think it's also important to note that you guys have a very advanced calibration system. I mean, the microphone has multiple microphones in itself. So there's a whole suite of sophistication that goes on. And then you guys have been working on this room correction. I remember Trinnov back in Sherwood, Newcastle. I'm talking 2007, 2008. Yeah.
It was the end of 2008 and then going into 2009. And you may remember there was a small hiccup in the economy.
Yes, I do remember that very well.
So they didn't survive that trauma, unfortunately. But
yep. Well, we're here now, and I know Leon uses Trinnov in his personal reference system, which I heard is amazing. I hope the next time I come out to Raleigh for whatever we do at Audiovice, whether it's the Audiovice Live or just a press event, I would love to hear it if that's an option.
That's an option. You're welcome to come by.
Yeah. So let's go over some of the slides here you want to talk about. And then Leon, I wanted to talk about what's in your system and because you've tested out, I know you're quite the audiophile, and I've heard lots about just how you pick and choose equipment over the years. You're very experienced at this. Talk about why you chose Trinnov in your system when you have a slew of other processing options. I think that would be an interesting perspective. And then also we'll talk about the kind of support that AudioAdvice gives when you buy a Trinnov product, to get this set up in a client's house, and the use case of why you would put a Trinnov over something maybe a little less sophisticated.
Yeah,
Oh, where do you want to start?
Yeah, I could start there, or we could jump in. So it was a matter of, I wanted 32 channels. I was actually goaded into this. The story behind it, one of my best friends works for a manufacturer that interfaces with Dolby Labs, and he sent me a video of a tour he did of their production studio where they mixed Maverick. And he's like, you don't have enough speakers. So then I decided, well, I need more speakers. But the Trinnov, what amazed me the most compared to what I had when I put it in was how it tracked the surround objects so well. It's just incredible, the sense of space and effortless I got with it.
So what's running in your system? Like, give us a rundown of the speaker complement, the brands you're using, and just the layout. How many rows of seats do you have?
It's a bunch of JBLs. It's all the surround channels are JBL Pro speakers. They're little 705s. The fronts are 4367s, 3 of them with sub 18s across the front. I've got a smaller 18, 2 of those in the rear. It's all Levinson amps across the front, and the JBL amps for the surround channels. And I think there's an ATI amp running the 2 rear subs. And Sony projector, big screen that's huge. It's a ton of fun.
Awesome. All right, so let's go over. John, you had something here you wanted to present. Let's.
Well, I got interrupted because of my network connection, but I've got several different presentations here, because I wasn't sure what you wanted to talk about, and rather than just forcing people to go through my slide deck, I'd be much more interested in having a conversation. And if this way, I've got some visual aids handy in case they're called for, or I can do just a brief overview if you're. I don't know how familiar your audience is with Trinnov, but I don't want to presume anything.
I would, a quick rundown I think would be a good idea. I know waveforming is something that you guys are working on, and it's still a work in progress. I'm sure people have questions. I have questions about that. One question I have about waveforming is, in order for it, as it stands now, in order for that to get the full benefit of waveforming, you need to have on-wall subs in the front of the room and the back of the room. And that's difficult for some people to implement. And there's certainly not a lot of products that are on-wall capable that have good output.
On-wall, in-wall, or just on pedestals. If you have a baffle wall, you can pretty much put them wherever you want to put them. But you're not, fundamentally, you're not wrong. It is much more specific in terms of kind of where you put the subs than a lot of other approaches might be. And for very good reasons. That if you want to jump into that, we can go straight there.
Well, I'll tell you, the one challenge I have in my personal theater room is I have 2 rows of seats, and unfortunately the second row is only 3 or 4 feet off the back wall. Yeah, so no matter how many subs I throw in the room currently, there's still too much bass below 40 hertz, just because you're close to a maximum pressure area. Yeah. So my understanding is by using waveforming, that nullifies that, and you're actually getting within a plus or minus couple of dB variance with all your seats in all the rows.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, at CEDIA, when we were doing that really over-the-top demo, the room had been built and all the speakers wired up and in place, but we hadn't put up the parts of the walls that include the acoustic treatment and what you see when you walk into the room. It was still just kind of a skeleton. And of course, we wanted to turn it on to make sure that everything was working the way it's supposed to before you start covering things up. But as it happens, Peter Eilert was driving the bus, and he put on some electronica with really deep pounding bass. I happened to be standing in the back of the room talking to one of my colleagues, and I was caught off guard because there's this loud, pounding, visceral bass, very distinctly coming from the front of the room, and I'm standing, I don't maybe a foot and a half away from the rear wall that had a whole bunch of 21-inch drivers in it, and it didn't seem to be making any sound at all. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even as loud as I would expect from a real wall. It was almost like I was standing outdoors. And so I just gently put my hand on one of the 21-inch drivers to see if it was working, and sure enough, it was working its little heart out. But what it was doing was absorbing all of the energy that had come from the front wall,
Right.
and killing off all of the reflections that ultimately are the cause of standing waves and all the problems of reproducing bass in small rooms.
Yeah. We have a super chat here I was going to put up real quick from Brandon Burrow. What's your most purchased Trinnov home theater system? Which models and why do you think so? So I think the question is, which Trinnov processor do most people buy, and which one is needed depending on the type of system you're setting up? Now, I'm going to guess if you're trying to take advantage of waveforming, you're going to need how many subwoofer outputs to take advantage of that? So you would probably need to go
depending on the size of the room, possibly only 4.
Oh,
You
okay.
can
So
do
2 up front, 2 in the back.
You can do 2 in the front, 2 in the back, and get very satisfactory results unless you have a relatively tall ceiling. As you start stretching the vertical dimension, there comes a point where instead of just having the 2 side by side, you really need to split it into 4 in a rectangle to maintain control over the shape of the wavefront.
So
But to answer
conceivably,
his question, the Altitude 16, which, notwithstanding the name, can actually do 20 channels of decoding and rendering, and all of our processors are outputs are completely assignable. If you wanted to do mono with 15 subs, you could do that. There's no real limit. It would be silly to do that, but you could. Most popular item that we have in terms of just sheer volume is the Altitude 16. The configuration, of course, varies from one place to the next, but we're seeing quite a few, like 9 ear level speakers, so maybe 2 rows of seating. So you've got 2 sets of side surrounds plus a set of rear surrounds and a pair of wides, along with the 3 screen channels. So we're seeing quite a bit of that. And then, X number of subwoofers and either 4 or 6 up above.
so conceivably, you could get an Altitude 16, set up a 7.1.4 system, and still have the 4 subs and take advantage of waveforming.
Yeah, right. You can anything up to 20, a total of 20 channels. So 9.4.6 works.
Yeah, or in a bigger room, 9.6.4.
Yeah, either way. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's a big feature. So I would definitely agree that the 16 is our most popular, because a lot of people don't realize it's expandable out of the digital channels for your subwoofers. People look at it and say, oh, well, I've only got 16 channels, but you can throw a DAC onto your 4 digital channels and allocate those just to the subwoofers.
Right.
Yeah, the way that works is that, like, out of the box from the factory, our default setting for the SPDIF coaxial output and the Toslink coaxial output is that they'll be carrying in stereo, normal SPDIF digital. They'll be carrying whatever you assign to channels 1 and 2. Now, by default, we use 1 and 2 for left and right, so that makes it super easy to, if you have a DCS Vivaldi or whatever you want to do for your main left and right channels, it makes it super easy to do that. But we can also, and this is where the +4 software update came in that we did a couple of years ago, you can also configure the system just by choosing the option so that channels 17 and 18 will come out of the coaxial output, and 19 and 20 come out of the Toslink. So with the addition of a couple of stereo DACs that don't necessarily have to cost a lot of money, you can go from 16 up to a full 20 channels.
Which is super cool, John. I was really excited to see that. That just opens it up to a whole different level.
Yeah, and similarly, if you have a 32 channel altitude 32, because it comes in different configurations depending on how many channels you need. But if you have an altitude like Leon's, it actually can do 36 channels now. It's no longer limited to 32 channels.
So that's two advantages to a Trinnov type processor over less expensive processors that don't have these two features. Number one is you have digital outputs. So if you want to run a fully active speaker system, you don't have to you could skip an A to D conversion and just do digital outs directly into your DSP amplifier. That's a huge advantage. In my opinion, active speakers are the future. And if you have the ability to run active speakers in the room, there's a lot of advantages to that. The other thing that you're able to do with the Trinnov that you can't do with most mainstream processors is have multiple side speakers. Yeah. And if you're running more than 1 or 2 rows of seats, that's critical. And I can't believe that there's so many 15 plus channel processors out there that won't let you reassign an extra pair of side channels. In my opinion, the side channels are like the most important surround speaker because we lateralize that sound so well. You want to have good coverage across all your rows.
Totally agree with you. There should be a pair of side surrounds for each row of seating, ideally. The Atmos standard supports, the standard left and right surrounds plus another pair in front of the standard ones and yet another pair behind. So you can do a total of 6 ear level surrounds just on the sides, and then more behind you. And since 2014, when we introduced the Altitude 32, we've been able to do, all 34 channels plus LFE that is part of the Dolby Atmos for Home standard. And, now like 9 years later, we're still the only people who can give you that full menu to choose from. There aren't that many people who need that many speakers, but, as you've already pointed out, Gene, that it's important to be able to pick the speakers that are appropriate for where the speakers have to go. And unfortunately, everybody who's running a system on a DSP chip based solution, they have to live with the limitations that the DSP companies decided to make, because the only way TI or Analog Devices makes any money at all is by selling just a ton of those chips. Right. So by definition, it's kind of a mass market thing. And their goal is to, sort of dumb down or simplify or value engineer, if you will, the code that they receive from Dolby into something that will run on an affordable DSP chip that they can sell a lot of. And one of the decisions is typically, well, a single pair of speakers for the sides, that's fine. And they move on. But, the problem is that they're DSP engineers. They're not necessarily audio guys.
Gotcha. There was a question I wanted, we didn't get a chance to answer. It was about your amplification. Let me see if I could bring that back up again. Is Trinnov only processing or amplification too? I think that's an important question because when you're getting into these high channel counts, you need amplification that has high channel density, but also doesn't act as a space heater. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about your amplifiers, because I know I think do you use ICE or do you use Hypex?
Use a variety of things. We have 2 different 8-channel amplifiers. One uses the Hypex Encore 500 module, if that makes sense to people know what that is, and that's the less expensive of the 2. And then we have another one that uses the Encore 1200 module, which you don't see very often, but it's even better. And both of those also have old school big linear power supplies, big toroidal transformers, caps, the kind of stuff that we were designing back when I was with Mark Levinson in the 90s on the power supply side. More recently, we have an all digital, meaning switching power supply and switching amplification stage in the Amplitude 16, which is it's a 3U box, so it's about that tall. It has 16 channels of output. They're bridgeable, and so you can have anything from 8 to 16 channels depending on what your needs are. And it's 200 watts at 8 ohms, 400 at 4 ohms, 800 watts bridged into an 8 ohm load, and over 1,000 watts when bridged into a 4 ohm load. And ultimately, the gating factor is just how much power you can sell. But yeah, it's an extraordinarily powerful product, and it also has, as you were alluding to, Gene, a combination of power density and channel density and flexibility that I haven't seen anywhere else. That was a significant project. It didn't mean to avoid your question. That's ice power technology.
Yep.
And actually, when we were working with the ICE folks on that, at one, it was during the pandemic, so there's a lot of Zoom calls and everything. And at one point, the ICE engineers sort of were looking at each other as they sat around their conference table, and were saying things that we couldn't really understand. And when we asked about it, he said that, well, we're just a little bit off balance here, because usually in these meetings people are asking how do you make it cheaper. You're asking us, can it be any better, and it was just not something they were expecting. But it's a fabulous little amplifier.
Yeah, I've tested the latest ICE module, not in your product but in a competitor's product, and I was very impressed with the performance, because these Class D amplifiers they're basically load invariant now. So any speaker impedance you throw at it, you're going to get consistent frequency response, just like the best linears. But now you've got the efficiency of Class D, and like I said, it's not a space heater anymore, because you can't put 16 channels of Class AB amplification into one chassis and expect it to run cool and not weigh 200 pounds.
Right.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
So I wanted to share here.
The other thing about the amplifiers, there is actually one thing about the amplifiers that is a lot more important than just making sure that they all look nice in the rack, and that's the channel, taking care of the gain structure. And the idea being that if you have a preamp and a power amp, and one of them clips before the other one would have clipped, and whichever one clips first, that's as loud as you can play the system. So for every decibel of mismatch that there is between where the first one clipped and where the other one would have clipped, you lose a decibel of signal that you just can't make use of it. Therefore, you lose a decibel of signal noise ratio. And on that basis alone, just making sure that everything is matched up so as to maximize what's available, we typically are 7, 10, 12 dB advantage over comparably well-built power amplifiers in terms of where the noise floor is. And when you got this many speakers in the room, even a fairly small amount of hiss starts to add up.
Yeah, definitely. So how do you connect? Probably people that aren't familiar with the connection scheme of a Trinnov product. You got all these amplifiers. You're not running discrete XLRs for each channel, are you? Or do you have like a DB25 connection to the amplifiers? How does that work?
We do a little bit of both. On the Altitude 32 and on the Altitude 16, channels 1 through 16 are available on normal XLR, balanced analog outputs. On the Altitude 32, you can have, in addition to 16, you can have 24 or 32 sort of built-in channels. And if you look at the back of an Altitude 32, it's already pretty full, and there's not room for another 16 XLRs. So the first 16 channels are available on XLRs, and all 32 channels are also available on a DB25 connector, which is just this, connector that's long and skinny and has 25 pins in it. If you know what a DB9 connector is from old serial port days, it's just a wider version of something like that. But so there are 25 wires in there, and we use 24 of them for 8 channels of balanced analog audio. So we can go from that to a breakout cable that gives you all the XLRs for whatever power amps you might want to use. Or if you're using our power amps, you can go DB25 to DB25 and make all 8 connections kind of at one go. which minimizes the opportunity for messing things up, getting your wires crossed, literally. And it also just makes it easy to have a nice clean back of the rack.
And the performance is the same whether you're going DB25 or a discrete XLR.
Yep. It's fully balanced, professional, analog audio.
It just gives you guys the idea of how ridiculous some of the expensive cable stuff is, because you're dealing with Trinnov processing and amplification, which has state-of-the-art noise floor and distortion, and they're using DB25 connections and getting incredible performance. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at cables that have batteries slapped on them. But I won't digress too much on that. I wanted to share Leon's pictures here. Can you guys see the pictures that I'm showing here right now?
Yeah, so this is a funny story. So I didn't plan for the future. You see the plate on the left? That's where my one of the surround speakers was, I think the front, or height speakers. I had it mounted there when I first installed this theater, and then I had the whole room sprayed with spray foam. Luckily, I ran conduit. So my solution was to pull a bunch of extra speaker wire, which, Gene, as you said, this is just basic, the smallest jacketed 12 gauge I could find.
Yep.
And then disperse it out to these other speakers. And I use the Unistrut so I could put them wherever I wanted to. And I can also move them later if I want to, because I left a whole bunch of slack in the cable. And I had to do the sidewalls the same, because I only ran one pair of surround speakers. And but luckily, I had enough conduit to pull all this through and get all the channels.
I love the porthole on the door, and also that the projector's in its own, it's in a separate room, and that cuts down the noise significantly. So you must have a really quiet room.
It's really quiet. Yes.
I was going to say, Gene, if you can share, see if you can share the entire image, because I think that what I'm seeing right now is the top of the email.
The problem is you use a Mac, and I can't get the images off of Outlook.
Oh no! Now, oh no! I was going to say I can share my screen if you guys.
Okay, let's do that. Yeah, let me.
Yeah, let me see if I can. I know if I look distracted in the beginning of this, guys, it's because I was trying to find the exact pictures. Like I know I've got them.
So Leon, what are those speakers on the ceiling? That those are JBLs? Because I don't.
They're 705s. The JBLs.
Okay.
It's a pro speaker.
I gotcha. And what do you have it? You have it set up so you could do all three formats. Do you do Oro in there as well, or do you focus mostly?
I haven't. We've been traveling so much once I retired. I really haven't messed with it that much.
I gotcha.
But yes, I could, because that's another cool thing about the Trinnov. You can map to what format it sees, and then which speaker in that format it's going to play. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, John, that I think is just super cool is all the profiles you can set up. Yeah. The different presets.
For example,
there's 32.
29.
29. Okay. Yeah.
29. Yeah. Don't exaggerate. But I there's a customer in the Mid-Atlantic who actually, there's a customer down south who actually uses all 29 presets. He's the only person I know of that does that. But the fellow in the Mid-Atlantic, for some reason, he watches movies. I may have this backwards, but he watches movies in the front row, but he listens to music from the back row, or maybe it's the other way around. But he's got, 2 pairs of side surrounds, as we were talking about before, one for each row of speakers, so that he takes advantage of exactly what you're talking about, Leon. He has 2 different presets, and with the main listening position in the front one for movies and in the second row for music, and the speakers sort of automatically understand that, okay, when I'm in this preset, he's sitting further back, and we shift everything further back.
That's right.
To match.
It's really cool. You can have a preset for as that, or just 2 or 3 listeners, or the room full of people too. It's really cool.
Yep.
Here we go.
Yeah. So these are some of the ones I have. So this is the ported window you're talking about. You want to talk about it a little bit, Leon?
Oh, it's just, I wanted to have this industrial look, which turned out to be the only way to retro it all in. So that's what occurred.
Well, I think I got some other ones. Well, let me see if I.
What acoustic treatments are you using, Leon?
It's all kinetics. It's 4 different kinds.
Sweet.
And
So you got three. You got 3 rows of seats there.
Yeah.
And I wish I had a full picture of the rack room.
What's the size of the room, Leon?
It's a 19 by 30 by 12. And I test a bunch of stuff in here. You know, it's trickier now with the Trinnov because of the way there's so many channels and stuff to disconnect, but it's fun to test stuff. When we did all the testing on projectors for our projector tool, I had them all in here, and they were all, I had a big board set up. I slide them back and forth, measuring their output. It's a good room for testing stuff.
Well, huge advantage you have is 12-foot ceilings gives you a lot of separation between the height channels and the ear level channels. I mean,
Yeah.
10-foot is great, but 12-foot is even better.
Yeah, it's nice. I really enjoy it. And yeah, it also sounds amazing for music. It was funny. Going back to the Trinnov, I hooked up the Trinnov when I just had the 4 height channels and sides and rears, and it was so much better than what I had from an immersive standpoint. And yes, I'm a Rolling Stones fan. It was so much more immersive than what I had previously. It was just, I'm like, gosh, because I just ordered everything and hadn't put it in yet. I'm like, wow, I don't even know I need to do this because it was amazing.
Are you a big fan, since you're a music fan, are you a big fan of spatial audio?
Yeah, I have. I've been playing around with it a little bit. But I've got too many hobbies. Travel is the main one that eats up our time, and our new grandkid. So we're there a lot. But anyway, spatial audio is great.
Reason why I bring that up is we were talking privately before is a lot of the Atmos mixes for movies, especially the Disney ones, don't take advantage of objects, but spatial audio, a lot of good spatial audio.
Boy, do they take advantage.
Yeah, spatial audio is great.
Yeah, and that's another thing I was going to say about Leon's theater. It's one of the best 2-channel performances I've hands down heard in a theater. So it's super immersive, but also very detailed. And that's a question I get a lot about Trinnov. Is a lot of the 2-channel people come over and say, "Oh, is it musical?" And I think it does. I think it does everything well. I don't think it does anything wrong.
John, I hadn't thought of what you mentioned about running the left and right speakers and getting a really, really high-end DAC. Now you got me thinking there.
I'm not necessarily advocating. I don't want to spend your money for you, Leon. But that was the idea, is just to make, because people, often will have already bought one of those and understandably want to use it, right?
Yep.
So yeah, it's easy to do.
So here's a very important question about your theater room, Leon. Do you have a snack bar?
Yeah, we do. And a popcorn machine.
All right. And some bourbon?
No, I'm a Pinot lover.
Oh, okay. That'll work.
But I hate cleaning out that popcorn machine. It's a pain in the butt.
They are, yeah.
It smells good, but boy.
Yep. So here we got another comment. You built essentially my dream theater, fully adjustable speaker position, so you can nerd out with the setup. Yeah, that's a huge advantage.
I will probably do that this spring when we're here and I have some time.
Yeah. Here's another good question. Where's the MLP of the room? Like, where do you sit? Is it in the second row, the first row?
Yeah, it's the second row, the center seat.
I figured that. Yeah. So like you said, you have multiple calibration profiles. So if you're stuck and you have a bunch of people over and you're stuck in what I call the mother-in-law seat, which is the worst seat in the room.
The back left.
You could set your calibration profile for that so you get a decent experience to hell with everyone else.
You could. We also give you the opportunity, let's say you have, I don't know, half a dozen measurements in the listening area. We have a weighting system, so you can tell us exactly how much more important you are than your mother-in-law, or however you want to handle that. But if you want the main listening position to sort of count 5 times more as 5 times more important than some other position in the room, just put a 5 next to it and leave everything else at 1, and you're off to the races.
Mm-hmm.
The only way of doing that with other systems that I'm aware of is to actually repeat the entire measurement process more
Right.
than once without
Yep.
moving the mic.
No, the flexibility of the Trinnov is just, there's nothing like it even close to it. There just isn't.
And
Well,
I
and you
think
can place your speakers more objectively throughout the room. You have following like the RP22 of just making the entire room sound good in terms of coverage, and then kind of specialize that down without having to either A, take multiple positions, or compromise speaker positioning in other spots.
and of course, in terms of seat to seat consistency and so forth, there are a couple of ways of trying to skin that apple. But there's the like MSO, multi-sub optimizer approach, which is kind of a brute force computational approach. It can work quite well. And usually, it's for, any number of subs, but typically the four corners of the room kind of thing. But we have a new bass technology we introduced about a year ago in Barcelona at the ISE show, called Waveforming, which gets the consistency from one seat to the next in an entirely different way. And it works markedly better, measurably and audibly better.
So does Waveform still bass manage all the other speakers in the system, or do you use the bass and full range speakers? Like if you had full range towers, would you still bass manage the full range towers?
We don't do that or at least we don't recommend it currently. That is something that we may come. That's another step for down the road. Right now, we're trying to make sure that everybody's first impression of waveforming is just as good as possible. Hence, we're being a little bit more strict about kind of where the speakers should be, the subwoofers should be, because physics is physics. We can't play with that. It works the way it works. But down the road, if you have bass capable speakers that can assist in the whole process, we will be able to use them. It's not a huge priority in my mind at the moment. Frankly, I want to get it to the point where, and now that we have the final graphic user interface for the waveforming, it should be pretty easy to train up our dealers on how to do this and to get it out into the world as many people as want to use it. As of Cedia, the user interface was still just really ugly. The underlying code has been stable for about a year now, but we have to make it easier to use. And at this point, it's pretty straightforward. You have to tell it, sub number 1, 2, 3, or however many are the emitting subs in the front wall. And then these others are left unchecked because they're absorbing subs in the back wall. And one or two other settings. And then it's mostly a couple of dozen measurements and let the thing crunch the numbers itself, which is actually, go ahead.
Oh, I think it's important to note that regardless of how good this room correction system is, the waveforming and everything else you guys do, there are people out there that think, well, because I have this room correction, I could just have an untreated room. And I could put it in a gymnasium if you want. Why don't you talk briefly about that? Because I think people are under the misconception that you don't need to treat the room and have good room acoustics to make this stuff work.
It's the best.
You want to take that, Liam? Yeah, I agree. The kinds of things, whether it's us or anybody else who's doing, DSP based digital room correction, the kinds of things you can do with DSP are a perfect complement to the kinds of things that you can do with passive acoustic treatment. They work together really well, but they're not a replacement for the kinds of things you mentioned. The gymnasium, if you tell me you want to set up a home theater in a gymnasium, I'll give you a really good sounding gymnasium, but you'll still be able to tell it's a gym, right? The RT60 just goes on for a second or more. So yeah, and it works both ways. What DSP can do can't be done by passive, and what passive does especially when it comes to the overall RT60, like how long the sound is bouncing around in the room. That's almost entirely determined by passive treatments, until something like waveforming comes out to handle the stuff that's really hard to do passively.
Hey, John, I have a question on waveforming. Have you had many vendors contact you about how they should start thinking about subwoofers?
Yeah, as you might imagine, without naming any names, there are some subwoofer companies who are really excited at the opportunity, A, to sell more subwoofers,
Oh,
and
yes.
B,
Selling
to
6
kind
to
of
8
strut
to
their
9.
stuff.
Yeah.
Well, but if you have done all the hard work of making a really exceptional subwoofer, and then you stick it in a room with all the standing waves and everything else, it's really hard to hear some of all that hard work you put into it. One of the nice things about waveforming is that you actually retrieve all of the dynamics and details that normally get kind of lost in the mush of, the bass bouncing around in the room for upward, half a second or sometimes more.
Yeah, I'll give you a perfect example. I was giving a consult to one of my clients, and he bought a Perlison D215S, which is a phenomenal sub. And he's like, this sub is slow, it's boomy. I go, let's take some measurements in your room. And he had no control over RT60. I mean, he had no passive treatments for bass frequencies, and he's only using one sub. I'm like, it's not the sub that's boomy, it's your room. And people often forget that, because it's like buying tires on a car. Like, nobody wants to do it, right? But you need to have good tires if you want traction. So until you address the room and you get your room acoustics in order, it doesn't matter how good the equipment is or how good the room correction system is, you're going to be at a compromise.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
And
I was actually talking to John earlier about this. Whenever we design rooms that are kind of a ways out, because a lot of people are potentially years out from designs, so we try to future proof as much as possible. And I was asking John, I was like, well, how are we going to be able to set this up for waveforming if he wants to do it, either now or eventually. And so I think we kind of settled on running as much conduit as possible to be able to just be flexible and kind of like a situation like Leon had. It's just trying to think ahead.
Your friend.
Yep. If you can squeeze behind the wall and walk back there, it might be a little bit easier, but otherwise, about your best option.
Yeah.
Well, we're converting our theater here in Connecticut to waveforming, like starting tomorrow morning. I wanted to get this podcast out of the way, but yeah, it's a winter project since we do less training here at this time of year. And
so we got a question
I'm
here.
looking forward to it. It's gonna be fun.
John, can waveforming be used with 4 subs and corners at the floor level, not in the middle of the height of the room? And I pretty much know how you're going to answer this, that right now it's not supported, but you're looking into it. Am I right?
You're pretty close, but I don't want to make any guarantees, and I do want to sort of manage expectations. But we have done some experiments. I just don't know how consistent this will be. So, but for example, a colleague of mine out in California has basically 4 corners set up, except that the right rear subwoofer is, instead of being in the corner, it's about a third of the way toward the screen, because his equipment rack is right in the back right hand corner. So just there wasn't room for it. So it's a little bit kind of asymmetrical, but roughly 4 corners. And he ran waveforming just for the practice, basically, of the measurement process and so forth. And he said he was actually really stunned at the improvement. Not as dramatic as what we've demonstrated, at CEDIA, for example, which was 24, 21-inch subs, which was very much over the top. But he said it cleaned up the mid bass in particular, which has been a problem in that room.
Mm-hmm.
Well, John, another great thing that brings up about Trinnov, just thinking about waveforming, that's, to me, as big a deal as maybe going from component video to HDMI. And how many products out there that you buy and spend a lot of money on can you get this kind of upgrade on an old product? That's the cool part about
Oh,
Trinnov.
yeah. You guys are going through my entire introduction deck, but that's fine. Yeah, I mean, it's a uniquely sustainable product because with the computing horsepower we have, we have an actual Linux computer in there. It's it's a computer, so it can do a lot of different things with just different software. Unlike a DSP chip, which is very cost effective, but it's closer to a one trick pony, right? It's going to do what it was designed to do when they fabricated it, and that's pretty much it. We've if you go back to Altitude 32 serial number 1, it still exists. It's in our R&D facility in Paris, and it's running all the same software that current production stuff is running. It's more often than not actually running beta software we haven't even released yet.
And how old is that? When was that unit made?
2014.
Yeah, 10 years ago. That's unheard of.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the investment.
I mean, the HDMI board has had to be swapped because that actually requires specific chips. But with the exception of the HDMI board, it's pretty much the way we built it in the first place.
It's a lot up front, but it's a great long-term investment.
Yeah. It should be the last processor you ever need to buy, because another thing that hasn't been actually mentioned, but all the software updates that we have for the Altitude 32 are for free to all existing customers, because we're developing the software anyway because of our own intellectual curiosity, or because of market and competitive forces or whatever. If we're going to be developing the software, why not give it to all the people that have helped us get to where we are? So with hardware, if we actually have to do surgery on your box and swap out the HDMI board, there'll be a cost associated with that. But the software updates are free, and that's where most of the new decoders and the cool new features, updates to things like the optimizer, all that stuff is just free for the asking if you have the platform to use it with.
And John, is there anything that would need to be swapped out outside of just the video side of that, or that's possible to swap out or upgrade?
Oh, it's quite modular. I mean, it's rare, but we've even done full motherboard swaps where we literally are, doing a brain transplant on the box because it got hit by lightning or whatever. So yeah, the hardware is designed to be quite modular, and it can be updated however you need to. But the HDMI thing is the only thing that I would expect would be replaced. But some of the modularity is also in, for example, the Altitude 32. You can buy it with 16 channels or 24 or 32 channels, depending on, the scale of your particular system. We're not going to make you buy all 32 if you only need, 19 or whatever. So there's modularity there as well. And if you decided to start with a 16 channel unit and then you realize a year down the road, should have gone for the 24, the upgrade can be done on your kitchen table. It's that easy. And it's the difference in the cost between the two units. So it's, you're not paying a penalty for taking it kind of one step at a time.
Gotcha. Here's a good question about waveforming again. What frequency will waveforming optimize up to before handing over to passive room treatments? I guess what he's asking is it based on just the bandwidth of the 80 hertz crossover of the sub, or do you actually go higher on the subs than that?
We typically go higher than 80, at least to 120, because that's what the LFE channel standard is written for. And we can go higher than that. Of course, with higher frequencies, in order to create that nice flat wavefront that keeps all of the sidewall, floor, and ceiling reflections minimized and just goes to the end of the room where it can then be absorbed. As the waves get shorter, meaning higher frequencies, you also have to have more subs. They have to be closer to each other to maintain control. So there's a practical limit, but we've already designed some systems with our customers that go up to 180 hertz and or thereabouts.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we can do quite a lot. Then it becomes a question of how much of the bass do you want to handle that way? And that may well be a matter of what the room itself is doing. One of the things you can do with waveforming is, let's say you have a pretty heavily treated room that's, pretty dead. We can basically turn up waveforming and make it more active so as to dry out the bass and make it just as clean and clear as the rest of the room. On the other hand, if you have more of a symphony hall kind of motif where there's a long reverberation time, we can adjust on, basically there are 5 different settings for anything from relatively subtle to relatively strong. And the goal is to make sure that the entire room is doing the same sort of thing in terms of the room decay. Because if some frequencies just linger longer in the room than other ones do, they call attention to themselves, and it colors the sound of the room. And bass is almost always the thing that lasts the longest, just because waves are harder to absorb or scatter.
So do you measure this in the Trinnov and look at it to make that determination, or do you, after calibration, go into REW and do like spectrograms?
We advise both, but we do it. Our system is completely self-contained. You don't need to know how to use REW. I can actually, let me see if I can pull up those results. We also do the heat maps and the wavelet analysis, which is similar to what REW has.
Yeah.
So you can actually see, which frequencies are hanging around for too long in the room.
Yeah, because you can't just simply do an RT60 decay at low. It's not accurate at low frequencies. RT60 decay is good from like 100 hertz all the way up to 11 kilohertz, 20 kilohertz, whatever. But to actually measure the transient response of the bass, you have to use something like a wavelet. And I didn't know that Trinnov actually has that built into its own measurement system. That's
wavelet technology is actually part and parcel of the optimizer and the way it does a lot of its calculations. We just haven't. I'm poking around to see if I can get a display that is relevant, but it's taking too long. I'm sorry if I seem distracted, because it's only because I am. But yeah, we do a lot of wavelet analysis. I mean, the reason the company was started was to learn more about how we as human beings experience complex three-dimensional sound fields. And so, the optimizer kind of grew out of that research. And this is, in a lot of ways, it's the logical extension of what the optimizer does. When you get down to what Floyd Toole calls the transition frequency in the room, below which the room is really determining more than your speakers are in terms of sound quality. Once you're in that transition zone, it's really hard to do anything effective with passive treatment, and or with even active things like the optimizer. It really requires a somewhat different approach, which is what waveforming is. It's actually a logical extension of what we've been doing for more than 20 years now.
Yeah. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up all the talking points we were going to address. Unless, Nick, did you want to quickly talk about the process of, if someone comes to you and wants to set up a home theater system and potentially wants to use Trinnov, what's the whole process? Is it only done through, like, you have to visit that person? Is it local, or can you do an online purchase and an online calibration? How does that work exactly?
Well, you just write us a postcard and we'll send you one for free. No, I'm kidding.
I'm pulling it out now.
So no, we this is something that we don't think that we don't want to ship this to your door, and even if you can buy one, we don't want to ship it to you and just leave you kind of abandoned with it, because that's obviously this isn't the most easy piece in the world. This isn't a plug and play piece. This is something that really needs extra hands-on. So what we have is our consultation process. So we initially come in, people talk to us about their theater, then we move on, and our team can do full designs, etc. So that's where we want to decide if Trinnov's right for your room, and basically AK right for your budget, because I personally I believe Trinnov's right for every room. But once we ship it out and everything, we want to make sure that the room's designed around that, so the speaker placements are all in the right spot, and that we can help you set it up. So that's the whole goal behind it. But yeah, like I said, Trinnov's it's hands down the most powerful piece in its class, because there's really not very many pieces in its class, frankly speaking. But yeah, so our team absolutely loves it.
So last question about the Trinnov, I guess, is John, is what's going on with HDMI 2.1 and Trinnov?
Hi, Jonathan. So we've converted all current production is HDMI 2.1. It's a 40 gigabit per second chip, not 48, because there are no 48 gigabit chips that have more than a single output. So if you wanted to have two outputs, one for your projector and one for your TV that you use when you're just, I don't know, watching the news, you're just out of luck. However, so we're doing HDMI 2.1. They're out in the field now. There is quite a bit of demand for upgrade kits, and the upgrade kits, I expect them within a couple of 3 weeks from Paris. As far as how the upgrades happen, we need to know what model you have and what its serial number is, because the earlier Altitude 16s is just one specific example. The earlier Altitude 16s that only had 7 HDMI inputs, even though there was a hole in the chassis for the 8th little connector. That was a board that was built in Southern California. HDMI is the only thing that we don't do ourselves. It's just, you need a full-time staff just to stay abreast of this. So anyway, the MDS board that we started with in HDMI 2.0 in 2017 didn't require as much power as our current Cypress technology boards do. And so if it's one of those older MDS equipped Altitude 16s, it needs to come here to Connecticut or back to Paris to have a whole power supply swap, which of course has tendrils that reach throughout the unit. That's not something I would want to do in the field. On the other hand, if you have a relatively recent Altitude 16, say serial number larger than about 800, I don't know the exact number, then you already have the bigger power supply. And then it's just a board swap and a software update. And the main reason for the software update is to tell the hardware about this new board that it has to talk to.
And they're shipping with 2.1 as of 6 months ago, something like that.
Yeah, as of December, early December, I think it was.
Oh, okay.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's relatively recent. We wanted to make sure that everything went as smoothly as possible, so we were beating it up for quite a while.
So Nick, if somebody wants to come into one of your stores, like in Raleigh, for example, is there a Trinnov room? Is there a demo room set up with Trinnov processing, or is that something in the works, or how does someone get here?
Leon, correct me if I'm wrong. That's something. We'll have more to come on that soon.
I thought they started this week tearing up the main theater.
Yeah,
went in.
Yeah, we're gonna be going into it more, but that's gonna have Trinnov in there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet.
And so it'll be really cool. That should be ready. Gene, whenever you come down for Audio Advice Live or the next trip, we'll have to. The room would definitely be done by then.
Yeah.
But
speaking of which,
that piece.
Is it too soon to announce the dates for Audio Advice Live 2024?
No, it's live on the website. Yep. So yeah, we currently have our website up and running. I was trying to pull it up, and I was going to share the link, but our team will share the link up on the in the chat.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yep. So yeah, we're going to be August 2nd through the 4th at the Sheraton in downtown Raleigh. Trinnov's going to be there again. We're hoping. I'm not putting words in John's mouth yet, but
I'm planning on being there.
But they've really they've come through in a big way in the past couple of years, and so we're hoping to to take that to the next level, because every time they come into a room and set it up, it's just, it really is mind blowing. We started on the beginning of this call saying, you know, it was just one measurement, because I was, you know, pulling back the curtain. Things were running late, like John said, and I was like, oh man, this room's going to take forever to set up, because I had never really had hands-on with Trinnov. John goes in there for just a little bit of time, comes out, and I'm like, this room was completely transformed in that short amount of time. So that was my first also real hands-on experience with Trinnov, and yeah, the Cinemat stays.
Yeah, it was pretty magical. So here's the link for audiodevicelive.com if you guys want to check it out. I'm planning, last year I brought a posse there. We had a lot of people from Audioholics, and we did, I think we've turned out 14 or 15 videos and got a lot of views on them. So I'm planning again to bring, you know, some staff and family, and just, it's a great experience. I encourage anybody to come. I love the area. In fact, just North Carolina in general is beautiful. Just going to some of the other areas there and seeing the mountains and getting away from things is always a refreshing experience for me. So I hope you guys can enjoy that. I wanted to give a quick shout out. We're running a contest on Audioholics, and it's on the Martin Logan F100s. The first time I heard these speakers was at Audio Advice when Martin Logan did an unveiling, and I was blown away. It was in that little room that you guys set up with the Anthem STR separates, and it was an immediate love affair for me with these speakers. I think they look beautiful. They sound great. So we reviewed them. The review is on audioholics.com. They reviewed very favorably. They got product of the year for mid-price tower. So we're giving away the review samples. And we also have the ability, if you guys are not wanting to wait for the contest, there's a buy now link that goes to Audio Advice directly. You guys are an authorized Martin Logan dealer. I think you've got 2 rooms at Audio Advice in Raleigh where people can hear Martin Logan speakers. Is that correct?
I think so. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent experience. Well, guys, I appreciate you being on here. Leon, it was awesome to dialogue with you and learn about your theater room system. John, always. Nick, hope you guys have a great day. Don't forget about our Patreon channel at patreon.com/audioholics. We appreciate your support. You get direct access to me if you want to suggest video topics. And until next time, my friends, keep listening.